welcome everybody to our lecture this evening. And whether you're on Zoom or here in the museum, we have a really nice crowd right out here. Reminder to mute your phone, which I always remind myself to do. And also mute your mic if you're out in Zoom land, probably turn off your camera as well. So I'm Dan Halling. I'm in the Badger History Group Board of Directors. And, you know, for all the time I've been on the BOD here, I don't remember ever having a cancellation of a lecture, but we did last month, if you remember. And we have a superhero, Marvelous Mueller, who came in at the last minute and filled in, gave a great lecture. And then tonight we also had to we had a cancellation. So we have another superhero standing in, and this would be the mighty Manie, I guess. And he gave a talk about the history of the apple core, as it's called, back in September when we had there was a apple pressing event, cider making event on the property here, and I couldn't see the whole thing. I'm like, I'm going to get him for next year. Well, next year happened much faster, and thanks, Curt, for finding the time to do this for us tonight so we didn't have to cancel entirely. If you know the Badgerlands, they have incredible stories to tell. We'd like to divide them up conveniently into the glacial geology and the Native American presence, and then eviction, and then now return. And the farming era, and then the ammo plant era, of course, and then the demolition and reuse. But there's a lot of stories, sub-stories to all of those, and some of them go across and within each of those categories, and some go across those categories, and that is what tonight's lecture is. At least 3 of those periods of time, from the farming to the ammo plant and then to the current time. Curt is, I'm not going to tell you everything about Curt, a conservation biologist and an historian, an author, a professor, a musician, an actor. You did a good job in your Green Fire film, playing yourself. So
toughest job I ever had.
so
He was also a bartender in The Search for Grey Gold.
a bartender. Okay, yeah, he did. He was in another film. Yeah. So, but if you don't know him or about him, you're very new to the conservation community here in Sauk County and the state and beyond. So, the thing is, how did he become this conservator of apple trees? And that is what we're going to find out tonight. So, Curt, thank you. You're on.
Thank you, Dan. All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Heather. Pulling it together. And thank you all for coming out tonight. And I'll try to live up to that. Dan, this isn't actually much about myself. But since I was involved in all of the things that you'll see, you'll figure it out maybe. But I'm not sure how I became an apple conservator. I can talk about that maybe at the end, but in the interest of time, because we're running a little late, I'm going to launch right in to talk about this project, which some of you in the room have been involved in. Others have no doubt heard about. But let's just launch right into it. I'm going to resist playing the short video that we did 8 years ago. You can find it on YouTube, although it's hard to find. It's hard to search for right now. For some reason, it doesn't show up. But this is a short video that was done 2018. It's about 8 minutes long. And if we'd had our act together, I would have shown it to you because it's a beautiful little film that was done at the outset of the project. And it was done by a student filmmaker from Madison, Anders Gerda. So I'll provide that link to y'all because it's worth watching if you haven't seen it. And it provides a background on the project in a much more artistic way than I could explain it. And it's just really a beautifully done little film. And you'll see, but so you see, there's Allison Duff on this side, Dan Bussey next to her, me, and that's Dennis Kinchy, grandson of Roy and Lillian. He'll show up a few times in this presentation, but we're going to skip watch. Well, there it is. See, it would have worked. Maybe if there's time at the end, we can show it. But here's a very simple timeline of this project going back, and I'll show slides of these steps as after I show you the timeline here. When going back to almost, my goodness, 30 almost years ago now, when Mike began doing the bird surveys out here, that began in many ways the project, because it was then that Mike noted the old apple trees that were on the old farmsteads inside of Badger. So each of these steps, I'll show you some slides on Joe Metcalf taking photos, our efforts to find and locate and record these apple trees that are out there on the landscape, to grafting them, to the documentary little film, to transplanting them, to creating orchards out of them, all the way up to the present. So we're talking 28 years from the very, very earliest steps of this project to where we are now. And I'll walk you through a bit of this.
The video is also on the Sauk Prairie Conservation Alliance page for the
Yes.
Badger Apple Corps.
Yes, if you didn't hear that, Heather noted that on the Apple Corps page of the Alliance. Thank you, Ron, for helping to organize that. You can find the video linked. So just very briefly, I'm not going to do a lot of the real deep background here, but y'all know this. Y'all know the landscape that we are in here with the Baraboo Hills and the historic Sauk Prairie, with the Badger ammo plant superimposed upon the northern part of the prairie. And I use this to, of course, make note of the history here that predated European arrival with our Ho-Chunk and other native friends and neighbors. But of course, it was very quickly after European settlement converted to agriculture on the rich Sauk Prairie soils. Many of you have seen this photo before. Mike, do we have a date on this particular photo? 1892, really. Amazing photo. And you can see Ferry Bluff in the far, far distance, right? So you're looking sort of that way. This is the map of the historic farmsteads. You're kind of looking a little bit to the south-southwest, and you can see how thoroughly converted the Sauk Prairie was to crop agriculture at that point. But notice the foreground. You're up, just going up into the Baraboo Hills, and I'd like to examine this photo a little more closely to see if there might even be an apple tree in there, because you're probably on what would be the Shimneok farm, where one of the orchards was inside of Badger. You'll see a map a little later. So many of these farms, if you look at the historic farmstead map, again, you'll see the ones up to the top of the plant were long and linear. They had a bit of land up in the hills and then crop fields down on the flat, rich prairie. And especially up in those hills, which weren't suitable for crop agriculture, you would have had grazing and you would have had orchards or fruit trees in farmsteads at that point. There's a long history to apple culture in Sauk County. We were one of the places where apples were really first developed. There's a whole nother lecture to be given about an early orchardist from Baraboo by the name of Y.A. Tuttle. There's still Tuttles in Baraboo. And the Y.A. Tuttle was an early orchardist who brought in trees, especially cold hardy trees planted through the Baraboo Hills. So this is part of a larger story. So again, most of you know the part of the Badger story that has to do with the removal of the 70 to 80 farm families inside of Badger, with not much left after they were removed in 1942. But here's a pair of photos. I know you can't see the details too much, but I just wanted to kind of just show you what it looked like in 1937 when the first efforts to do aerial photography, mostly done by the US Department of Agriculture, were done all across the country. So these give us a really important baseline. And I need to get a copy of that photo that we can really zoom in on and see, in fact, where orchards might have been on Badger. And you can see, of course, how it was much converted after the Army came in the later aerial photography. So let's launch into the story. Here's one of the maps that came out of Mike's 1997 bird survey work. And you all know Mike very well. You know that when Mike is in the field, he takes note not only of the things he's out there to take note of, but he takes notes on everything. So it was in Mike's field notebooks that he noted the apple trees that occurred as he was walking the lines, the bird transect lines across Badger. Of course, there were stories and others, elders in our community whose families were at Badger, who knew of apple trees and remembered them, because apple trees have a way of lodging in memories. So we knew the stories, but Mike provided field notes that sat there rather dormant for a long time. But in the meantime, many of you who were around back then remember the Inside the Fence photo exhibit. Joe Metcalf was behind the fence. Joe Metcalf was one of the photographers participating in that. Somehow she also found time to do a little side project. She actually took photos of a lot of the apple trees inside a Badger. It's fascinating to look at these now because of how the vegetation has changed. These are in black and white, so they're really quite fascinating to look at. These are two trees just to the west of the Pioneer Cemetery. The one on the right here actually has just expired in the last year or so. It finally met its demise, but we grafted it. It lives on in our nursery and in other places. The other tree on the left there is actually thriving pretty well. So at some point, maybe we can go out with Jill and revisit some of the places she took these photos back in, what was it, 2000. Jump ahead. You know, we were very busy for a decade working out what would happen to Badger, who would get what land, what would they be doing, cleanup and demolition. A lot was going on in that decade between 2002 and 2012. But as soon as things settled out a little bit and land was allocated, I don't know exactly how it happened, but we returned to the apple notes that Mike had and our own experience of being out on the landscape and noting these trees. And that's when these two characters walked into the story. Dan Bussey on the left there. This guy who grew up in Edgerton and was the orchardist out at Seed Savers in Decorah, Iowa. Some of you may know about Seed Savers, a nonprofit that works to conserve rare and disappearing and lost varieties of fruits and vegetables. You can buy their seeds and propagate your own heirlooms in your garden. Dan, I got to know him a few years before this, and he knew about Badger. And he came out and started helping us, and he is the foremost expert on North American apples and their history. So we have this amazing guy who's a lot of fun to work with and have a beer with at the end of a work day. And also we had this young student, Kate Braun, who was doing a master's degree in Madison, and she got interested in this project, and she did actually the initial location of trees out at Badger and started tagging them. If you look in that upper right, well, right here, you can see a tag here. Those were her original tags. On the other photo, you see kind of redoing it a little later to make it a little more systematic. But these were the trees that were out there. We knew about them, and over several year period, we located, tagged, GPS'd them, and began to assess how they were doing out in the field. And just as one example, this is actually tree number 1. I call it the lone tree because it sits out there quite in the middle of the Badger lands. It bears fruit. There's some apples from tree number 1. Mike even has a photo of birds nesting in this tree right next to the apples. I couldn't find that photo today, but that tree number 1, you can actually see it I don't have a pointer here, but you see the dot. Ow, oh, right there. That's lone tree. And if you're familiar with that portion, it's on the Ho-Chunk portion of Badger, and it sits out there quite prominently. And it sits along a ditch, or actually on kind of a raised line, one of the old narrow gauge lines, I think. So to me, it's probably a tree that was not a old farmstead tree. It's probably a tree a worker tossed an apple out, and it grew. So there's trees that are predating World War II, trees that probably came in with workers who enjoyed an apple and tossed it out. But so this is the map that was a result of the location of the trees. This was the first version we did, and you can see up in the north on what was the Shimniok farm, a concentration of trees that was likely an orchard, just looking at the trees and judging them and seeing the quality of their apples. You see another concentration down in the southeast. That's the area we call Apple Alley. And that's kind of a mystery. We don't know why there's so many trees there, because it doesn't appear that they were even there in 1937 in the air photos. So maybe they were put in just right after that. We don't know. They're kind of big and old. You see another concentration down in the sort of south central part down by the hillside prairie. And then there's a little clot of them up in the northeast there too, right? You see them up here. That's on the Eschenbach farm instead. And when you look at those trees and the varieties of them, you can kind of surmise that there were 4 or 5 trees in the farmyard there of the Eschenbachs. This is not quite as easy a map to look at, but we did revise it with some updated GPS data. We still need to do this. This is all volunteer work, so there's not a lot of time to do all the things that need to be done. So we need to go back out and assess these trees and how they're doing. A number of them have blinked out. They've died in the field. So we have to mark that. But just to keep the story moving along, we began the process of perpetuating these trees in 2017. This was the first grafting workshop we ever did down in Park Hall in Sauk City. Yeah, you'll see a lot of familiar characters in that photo. You'll see Allison Duff, there's Keefe Keeley, there's the folks who started Brick Cider down in Mount Horeb. There's George Archibald, the founder of the Crane Foundation. There's Rob Nuri in the back. There's all kinds of good friends in this photo. And this began the process of holding annual workshops to graft the trees that would then be put into the nursery. So that was the year we started the nursery out on Dairy Forage land. Dairy Forage was nice enough to share a little plot of land right at the S-curve on the historic Roy and Lillian Kinchy farm. So one of the great stories of this whole project is this fella, Dennis again, Dennis Kinchy, returning to his grandparents' farm that he had heard about his whole life. And he was very close to his grandparents. He'd never been on their farmstead. He didn't even know really where it was. We figured it out and we asked him to plant the very first nursery tree. That's him doing it. That's the very first tree that went into the nursery in 2017. I'll come back to this land, but this plot of land, but take a look at it as it was in 2017. It took a couple more years for those trees to grow out before we began the process of transplanting them, digging them up out of the nursery. And the whole idea of this project from the beginning, the main kind of core goal, no pun intended, was to turn over to the descendants of those farm families who were removed a tree that would kind of honor their ancestors' sacrifice of their land, because they were never thanked much for their sacrifice during World War II. And we thought it would just be an interesting way of making connections across time. So in fact, this fella here, that's Terry Steiber. Terry's in the Steiber family. He's also in the Kinchy family. He was working at Dairy Forage Center at the time. He took trees that year. At least 2 generations of Kinchys came and took. I've given more trees to Kinchys in there, and then I know more Kinchys than Kinchys know Kinchys. So we began the process of transplanting these trees in the fall of 20 and spring of 2021, with that goal of getting them into the hands of descendants first and foremost. But then people began getting interested who were not part of that history. We started getting requests and questions, and so we began to transplant trees elsewhere, giving them away to other individuals, but also to certain institutions. This is the Culver Library in Sauk City. We put 3 trees in there the first time we transplanted, right next to the Great Sauk Trail as it goes through town. It's an old rail bed, and man, digging holes in that, it was like digging into concrete, literally. And I'm like, these trees are never going to make it. It's gravel. By God, if those trees haven't just thrived there. Next time you're in town, right across from Culver's, you can go to the parking lot of the library and you see these 3 trees there, and they have just done marvelously, amazingly. So I've gained a lot of respect for apple trees through this project. They survive a lot and they can make it in pretty difficult places. So some others from that first round of transplanting, including a couple trees at Park Hall. I like that one because I went to the membership list of the free thinkers in Sauk City. I went to 1940 to see if there were any members of the Badger farming community as members. And sure enough, Fred Waffenschmidt showed up. And I know the Waffenschmidts because my landlady was part of the family, Jackie Newmeyer from Sauk Prairie. She was 7 years old when her family was removed from Badger. She's alive and well, living on the north side of Prairie du Sac. So that tree over there was kind of planted in honor of the Waffenschmidts. They were members of the Freethinkers and also had several farms in Badger. Right across the street, when you drive out today, if your headlights are shining, you'll see the trees we planted on Ho-Chunk land adjacent to the Farmers Memorial. And those trees are doing darn well too. So they're being planted out in all these different places. In 2022, we got a request from the New Culver Community Park folks, said, gee, we want to put in a whole orchard. I'm like, oh God, okay, let's see what we can do. So as they were developing the New Culver Park, which many of you are familiar with, I'm sure, we actually planted a whole orchard, and they were really intent. They wanted to get as many trees from as many of the historic farmsteads as possible. And there's about 23 or 24 farmsteads that have apple trees on them, and we're almost there. There's now 21 trees in this orchard, and we got to get about 2 more families, and then we'll have a complete set. Those trees have also thrived. These are pictures from the planting and from this year. I think it was 2024 last year. Of the 21 trees there, 19 of them had apples on them after just a couple growing seasons. So it's really fun to see these trees bearing fruit now after they've had 7 or 8 growing seasons on them. That project, if you go to the Culver Park, you'll see this sign also installed. We got a small grant from Sauk County to do some interpretive signs. You'll find this one at the, I think this is the one at the hospital. I'm not sure. We have 2 of them. Yeah. And so we got this grant. We did these, and it tells the story of the Badger apple trees for people who are walking on the trails or in the park. And there's the one at the hospital, just right next door. In fact, you can almost see the other orchard at the far end of the trail there, just beyond the hill. So we have 7 or 8 trees at the hospital now. They've been really interested in this project too. And it's fun to have these signs out because people come up to you and they say, oh yeah, I heard about those Badger apple trees. I was walking in the park. And that's kind of part of another part of the project, which has to do with the educational activities. So we've done a lot of stuff over the years, just a few photos to illustrate it. Last year with our friends at the Worm Farm Institute, we did a little display of the diversity of apples. This was partly the Badger apples. Also, our friend up at Blue Stem Farms, Muffy Barrett, contributed some from her vastly diverse orchard. She has about 90 or 100 varieties up in the Baraboo Hills. And it's so fun to do these activities because people come up to you and they tell you stories. They tell you what their favorite apple is. They're intrigued. They had no idea there are that many kinds of apples. They complain about the apples they get in their store because they don't taste good. So it's really a fun way to share the history, not only of badger, but of the apples and the need to conserve the diversity of our agricultural crops, including fruit trees. So, and just a couple more from this year, we had the Sauk County Soil and Water Improvement Group, great group of farmers and others working on conservation throughout the county. They came out for a day. Look at this photo, because look behind us all, you'll see what is now the orchard that is where the original 2017 nursery was. There's a long story, I won't go into it now, but we planted in the nursery there in 2017 and 18. Because COVID came along, kind of messed up the whole sequence of what we were doing. So we made a decision to convert the old nursery into a permanent orchard that it will be there in perpetuity on dairy forage land. So those trees are now well above our heads, getting harder and harder to prune. There's a bag of apples back there. There's a tree right behind Rob Nuri's. I think this tree back here, some apples from that very tree are on the table. And this project has had, I don't know, its story is carried on in a way that none of us anticipated. There's so much interest in this. We've been on Larry Mailer's show. There's been articles written in magazines. There's been Milwaukee Sentinel Journal came out. This last fall, public TV came out because they want to do a whole sequence on Dan Bussey and his obsession with apples. So watch next year. They filmed out in the orchard and up at Sky High with Dan, and we had a lot of fun telling this story. But he is so taken with the Badger project because it's kind of his passion being played out here in a way that connects a lot of different people in fun ways. So after all of that, after now since 2017, almost 10 years of devotion to propagating these apples. Earlier this year, I decided to try to tote it all up and try to see what we've done. So here are some of the numbers for you. Out there in Badger, on all the lands of Ho-Chunk, Dairy Forage, and DNR, and Bluffview, there are about 160 apple trees that we know of. There's probably more. But those are the ones we've located and tagged. Of those, probably a dozen or so have died. So the total number of living trees is less than 150 now. They occurred on, so far as we know, about 23 historic farmsteads. There's one or two that sit astride a property boundary. So we have to figure out whether it's a Kinchy tree or a bass tree or whatever. Of those, we've collected and tried to graft from 120 of the trees. So we're doing pretty well, actually. 3/4 of the trees we've attempted to graft since we began. That includes a total of about 500 total trees. They don't all succeed, but you do multiple grafts of a tree. Over the last, since we started transplanting in 2020, we've handed out 262 trees. When I put that number together, I was like, whoa, man, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of digging. But it's the funnest part of the job. I'll show you a few pictures later on. Every year we try to, now we're trying to hit a kind of a rotation here where about 40 trees per year we hand out. And sometimes it's a little more, sometimes a little less, but that's kind of on average. And the Badger Apple Core nursery now has about 150 trees growing in it. You can come out and see that if you're interested in the springtime, especially. The orchard we've created out at Dairy Forage has right now 28 trees in them, some of them older, some of them we put in just this spring. We transplanted a bunch. And then in addition to the orchard at Dairy Forage, we've established plantings of trees at several other places on the Badger lands. I mentioned the Farmers Memorial, also out by the Maa Wákacak Leaf Studio. The Ho-Chunk have received about 8 or 9 trees there. We have trees at the park. We have trees at 768 in Sauk City. We have trees at the municipal parks in Spring Green. We have trees up at Man Mound. We have trees at Tower Rock School. And this is in addition to the individuals who've received trees. So these little orchards range from 2 to 21 trees. And these are more public spaces. So it's fun because then you can share the story. with the general public. Okay, this is a very complicated graph that you should not try to even read. But what it shows you is what we do through the year. I'm going to transition here a little bit and take you through a sequence of what happens in this project through the course of a year. So I can hardly even read this, and I'm sitting right in front of it. So it's taking you through the year, right? Starting with pruning, well, planning all the time, but pruning, collecting scions, clearing trees, digging trees in the nursery, pruning workshops, on and on, nursery, planting, orchard. So all of these sequence of activities all the way from winter to fall are what we do through the course of a year with just a handful of volunteers and anyone else who wants to help. And rather than explain this, I'll walk you through a year in the life of the Badger apple core. Really, it starts over the winter, toward the end of the winter with pruning. If you haven't pruned, it's a lot of fun. I love pruning. It's where you really get a chance to interact with the trees and help shape them and diagnose them and try to make them grow in a way that's productive and keeps them healthy. We do a workshop on that, both young trees, as in the nursery there on the bottom, and all these gnarly old apple trees. That's a fairly typical gnarly old Badger apple tree. This is a particularly nice one. This is tree number 204, which we call Rebecca's favorite. Rebecca works for the Dairy Forage Center. This tree is kind of in our little circle known for being really productive, disease-free, and bearing almost every year. So we try to maximize grafting of that tree. If you're not familiar with grafting, what you do is you take a little piece of living tissue from a tree, a quote parent tree, and you graft it onto standard rootstock. So to do that, you have to go out while the trees are dormant and collect what's called scion wood. That's what this is. These are cuttings that you use to do the grafting with. This is Allison Duff. We went out one year to collect scion wood. You'll see all the numbers on each of the trees. This is the critical thing. You have to keep track of that number from beginning to end, because that's how you maintain the lineage of the tree. Later on in the spring, after the ground has melted, you do the digging, where you begin to dig up trees that have been in the nursery and get them ready for transplanting. I will throw a little bouquet out to Sky High Orchard because they have been so great. We should mention Betty Thiessen, who is the keeper, as many of you know, of Sky High Orchard. She also was on the Badger Reuse Committee with Mike and I way back in the day. So it's a long friendship and collaboration with Sky High, but they let us store our trees after we dig them up in their cold storage unit, which is great because then we don't feel in a rush to have to make everything happen at once. And maybe the most fun in this whole project is handing trees out to people who would like them. So these include, that's Rebecca, but that's Rebecca. I just mentioned her, getting one of her own favorite trees. She lives in Madison and was going to put it in her backyard. There's Grace Fosen with another friend, Bill Robichaux. Bill got a tree and planted it in memory of his late brother. So these trees have great meaning for those who accept them. Up on the top there, you see Dale Jadeke, right? Dale, another of the Badger family descendants. So this is really a lot of fun when you're handing these trees out, because you sit around telling stories about Badger, about their interest in history, their history, interest in apples, whatever. And then they go into the ground wherever they go. That's Mimi Weist, I think, on the left there. Her family has some trees. The trees is my nephew planting one of the ones at the hospital. So planting trees. Then you have those scions you collected, those chunks of pieces of wood. They've been sitting in your refrigerator for the last month, staying cool. Then you bring them out and you do the grafting. This is from the first grafting workshop. And some people are experienced grafters. Some are complete beginners. We don't discriminate. That means our success rate probably isn't as high as it would be if we just handed them over to Dan Bussey and said, graft them for us. But this project is all about involving people in the process. So this was just from this year's grafting workshop, which I did in my own place. There's Connor standing up in the back there. And a lot of other friends here from all over the place. And every year we seem to get enough people to do, I don't know, 70 or so trees we'll graft per year. This year we did a little differently. People can, if you have a favorite apple tree and you would like to perpetuate it, bring a piece of sign wood and you can graft it and take it home. Bill, still got to get that one from your place. Yeah. And I just like this photo. This is the grafting crew from this year. So you're getting to the spring green up, right? So it's late April, early May. This is when you go out and look for apple trees because you can see how they stand out when they're blooming. There are not too many other things blooming bright white in late April, early May. You'll get plums blooming and a few other shrubs, but if it's a bigger tree, it's very likely to be an apple. So it's a great time to go look, especially as the vegetation in Badger has grown and the shrubs have proliferated. It gets harder and harder to find these trees. So this is when you want to go out and locate them and put tags on them and take care of the record keeping. Okay, you grafted those trees. They've been sitting, the grafted trees been again sitting in your refrigerator for a few weeks, waiting for the ground to warm up. This is when we plant the grafted trees in the nursery. And that is also an occasion for lots of people to get involved. There's at least 3 generations of Kinchies in this photo, I think. So, so this is in our newer part of the nursery in 2019, I remember. This is what it looks like. I think this is this year's planting. So this is now what is the nursery. And again, we're cycling through about adding about 40 to 50 trees per year and taking out the equivalent. And this is what you want when you're grafting. This is what you want to see a couple weeks later after you put the grafts in the ground. You want to see the young shoots coming out above the graft, which tells you it's a successful graft. And this is when you get a little nervous and you do your inventory and you figure out what percentage of trees survived. This year, I think we were at 66%, which is pretty good for us. We've been as high as 85 or 90 and as low as 50. So, but I love when you see this happening in the spring because it tells you that you've kept a tree going. And again, some of the trees that are out in the field have died. So the only representative of that tree still living is sometimes now in the nursery and orchard. You're in the summer now. This is maintenance time. It's quiet. You've been very busy from February, March, April, and into May. Now you're just kind of catching your breath. But that means you got a lot of caretaking to do over the summer. There's Rob. Rob Nuri's not here. I don't see him, but Rob has been a devoted part of this project forever. And it does a lot of the maintenance in the summer. And he also makes the little signs, right, that tell the story of the trees. Each of these trees has a little kind of biography that you'll see in a notebook back there on the table that I usually work on late nights in February with a glass of wine. That's what I do in February, is update the records before the season begins. Sometimes over the summer, we'll do another. This summer, especially, we did this little project. I thought I'd highlight this to throw a little bouquet out to Dan Holling because he called me up one day and said, you mentioned that tree 101 needs some attention. This is a tree up on the North Perimeter Road right near east of Burma Road. Many of you who know that stretch of road will see this tree. It's on the left on the north side of the road. We call it the watchtower tree because there was a historic watchtower up there overlooking all of Badger. And at the base of this tree is the concrete abutment of that tower. So this is what the tree looked like some years ago now, about probably more than a decade ago. But it had gotten badly, badly overgrown. So Dan Holling and I went out and did he worked me to the ground. We did like a 4-hour just assault and just cleaned up all around that tree to free it up. It's another one of the, I'd say, top 10 Badger apple trees because it has historically been very productive and produced really nice apples. And then in the fall, that's what all the work is all about, right? Doing the harvesting. So there's Gail Lamberty, all these different, there's Sherry Nolden there. I see her. but going out and seeing what you got. And one of the ironies of this is we don't know what all the fruits are like because we've been so busy just trying to keep the trees going. So when we have a good year, as we did in 2022, 2024, that's when you go out and try to collect as many of the apples as possible so you can see what they are. And they're all over the place. Some of them are really wonderful apples, plainly commercial varieties or orchard trees that are really just delicious, high quality apples. Others of them are, you know, someone threw a core out and it's a rolling of the genetic dice when you're finding old apple trees. Some of them are really nice, but don't judge an apple just by its color or flavor. This is one of the lessons that Dan Bussey has taught us. The title of this talk was History You Can Eat, but I should have said History You Can Eat and Drink, because cider brewers are really, really interested in these weird oddball varieties and trees that are out there on the landscape, because these modern highly engineered apples are not really good for making cider. I should say hard cider, for those of you who are not familiar with the traditional term for the alcoholic result of brewing cider. So there are several trees out at Badger that don't look or taste like anything, but they're really good for brewing. So this is one of the trees. This is, you can see this tree from Highway 12 as you're going up into the Baraboo Hills, right on the perimeter road. There's now 2 surviving trees. There used to be 4 along the road there. The one to the furthest north along the perimeter road is tree number 5. This is kind of one of our marquee trees because it's very different from every other apple tree at Badger. It's a russet apple. If you know apples or potatoes or whatever, russet means it's kind of sandpapery on its outside. It's got this unusual color. Look at that. It's kind of this kind of orangish golden color. And it tastes really good. And Dan was just intrigued by this apple, and he thinks it is a historic variety that actually originated here in Sauk County from up in the town of Greenfield. And he's surmised that it's a variety called a Dockham russet. We're going to test them now, literally, because we took some samples from this tree and sent them off to a genetic analysis lab out at the University of Washington. And we're waiting, drums rolling, the drum roll, to see if they determine if it is that variety or if it's not known. So stay tuned for whatever those results will be. And then finally, the last thing you do in a year of tending your apples is put them to bed for the winter. Out at Dairy Forage, you have a deer fence that surrounds their research area, but deer somehow get through deer fences. One year they did and nipped every single one of our trees. So we go out there and do an extra bit of caretaking. We'll actually be doing this tomorrow afternoon while the weather is still good enough to do this. So Rob and I and some volunteers, if anyone wants to join us, just stay after and I'll let you know. So we put the trees to bed for the winter. And then we start again come the new year. So just to wrap up, I don't know what's next for the Apple Core. This project was a side project, kind of one to, it started actually in kind of a discouraging time in the history of Badger and Wisconsin. I won't go into why I felt it was a discouraging time, but it was a way to focus on something positive that would connect people and involve them and allow us to tell the stories of Badger in a different way. But here's what, I just put this together this afternoon. We'll keep locating trees. There's actually 2 big groups of trees just to the north of the perimeter road inside the state park, one to the west of Burma Road, one to the east of Burma Road. I don't know anything about those trees, but there must be 50 or 60 more trees beyond the northern perimeter road. We'll keep grafting, but we're kind of moving toward focusing on more some of these trees that have special qualities and really do stand out, making more of those. Keep sharing the trees, keep putting in little orchards here and there for anyone who wants to. We can begin to identify these varieties. The tools for determining the varieties of apples have advanced a lot in the last decade. It's getting cheaper to do that. And so we'll have that special one that will be the first. We'll try to do that. And then there's a lot of interest in this project, as we've seen, not just here in the community of Badger, but well beyond. It's been pretty fascinating to see the emails I get and the questions I get about the project. And that is the story of the Badger apple core. Phil back there, he has trees in his backyard. Mike has trees. Heather, you don't have any trees. Yeah, we gotta get you an apple tree. Connor, you and Rebecca took some trees, I think. So you guys got trees? I can't even remember who we've given trees to. So
6 of them you gave us.
there you go. That's right. Now I remember. Just this spring, right?
Richard.
Yeah. The Litchers have a lot of stake in this project. The apple orchard at the Sauk at the Culver Community Park is on a Litcher. What was the Litcher farm there on the edge of town? So I'll say, in fact, I'll add that comment that for me, one of the really unexpected kind of blessings of this project is how you get to know the families and their history and the names. I know the names just from looking at the map, but getting to know some of the stories of the families and their connections, and how this project has helped to bring forward some of those stories in a way that I would never have expected. I'll tell the last anecdote I'll say on that. I showed the picture of Terry Steiber earlier. He came that day because he wanted to learn about the project. And then Dennis Kinchy and his sons came to pick up 12 trees, rented a U-Haul. And so here's Terry Steiber and here's Dennis Kinchy. Terry Steiber's part Kinchy. And like, do you guys know each other? And Terry said, and he looked at Dennis. Dennis looked at him. He says, family reunion, like 1977, up in the Klondike. Were you there? Yeah. That was my uncle so-and-so. And they went on reconstructing their family tree. Both of them, don't tell them this, both pretty good talkers. So they started yakking and they just got deep into family lore. And I'm looking at the watch. We got trees again. I'm like, nah, let them talk. This is why we're doing this. It was really wonderful to see them just reconnecting in their own family stories. So that's what this project has really offered in ways that, again, couldn't have expected. Okay, open for any questions. Yeah.
So where do you get your rootstock from?
Rootstock. Thank God for Dan Bussey. Dan has done grafting workshops for 40 years. And he knows exactly, he orders them, their standard rootstock in M7. That's what we've been using, which is a semi-dwarf rootstock. And I'm not sure, I think out of Oregon is where he orders his. He provides all the materials. He just shows up and does the workshop. And we're just so grateful. This is all him donating his time and effort. So we're really grateful for him. Yeah, right.
Kind of related to that, what's the rate limiting factor in determining how many grafts you do and how many trees in the nursery you should?
Great question. Rob Nuri will say this is 3-dimensional chess when we did try to determine what to graft and how many. Because you're trying to do, if you're we're not a typical apple conserving project. If our main goal was to conserve the genetic diversity of apples, we'd do things a little different. But what we're trying to do here is a lot of different things. We're trying to do that, but we're also trying to keep perpetuating the trees that are out there on the landscape at Badger. We're trying to represent as many of the farm families who were removed. So we're trying to maximize that. We're trying to prioritize trees that are really old and look like they're going to die so that we can perpetuate those. So there's a lot of things that go into the calculus of choosing which trees to graft. Have we grafted it before? Have we successfully grafted it before? Is it trees we want more of because we really like that tree? So that's kind of the mental exercise you go through when you're planning to collect those scions in the spring. Heather.
So to that question and answer, I was thinking, would you want to help nurture some of the plantings out here? Like you mentioned that russet, there was 2 of 4 that are surviving. Would you want to try to replant one out there?
That's a good question,
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Heather is wondering whether we would want to perpetuate the tree on site. Say a tree that we like is showing signs that it's not going to make it much longer. Do we want to perpetuate it there? That's a great question because it brings into the discussion the larger goals at Badger of what we want to see happen in the landscape. So I'll give you an example. Out the hillside prairie, the best prairie remnant inside of Badger, there were 2 apple trees at the top of the hill. One of them has died. One of them's doing all right, but it's a prairie. Apples are not native to Wisconsin. It's probably there because it wasn't plowed, but it may have been grazed. And often in pastures, you would have had apples that were thrown out or distributed by cows, perhaps. Do you want to keep growing apple trees in the middle of your core prairie restoration project? Maybe not. But we have it in the nursery, so we don't have to worry about it. So it's a great question. And we don't know because we haven't gotten to that point of having to do that. And meanwhile, we have these orchards going elsewhere, so it kind of gives us an insurance policy. Yeah.
Varieties have been identified, and what percentage of those are non-existent anymore?
So I can give you the numbers for North America, and this all comes from Dan Bussey's work. Dan, he was not doing this professionally. He had a family business that he ran for many years, but in every one of his off hours for 30 years, he spent them in libraries, historical societies, horticultural gardens, whatever. For 30 years, he tried to investigate this question. Ultimately, that resulted in him publishing the 7-volume illustrated history of North American apples. And in that, you will find descriptions of 17,000 named varieties of apples that were extant 100 years ago. And they had to stop him at 17,000. He could have kept going. We have great records going back into the 1800s because this was an important part of farming, agriculture, and settlement across the continent. So of those 17,000 plus named varieties, probably about 5,000 of them are grown in one place or another. They're heritage and heirloom orchards and orchardists scattered all around the country who perpetuate trees like this. Maybe 2,000 of them are grown regularly. Then usually what I do is say, when you go down to the grocery store, how many varieties are available? 6, maybe 5 or 6. So we've lost a substantial number, or at least we don't know if they exist anymore. And there's a great community of people out there all across the country who are fruit hunters out investigating and searching for trees. And you can do that right here in Sauk County. In fact, Dan has done another book he's working on of the history of apples in Wisconsin. He has determined there's about 600 varieties that were first identified here in Wisconsin. And there are a lot of those that we don't know if they still exist or not. Sauk County was a real hotspot, along with Door County, the Bayfield Peninsula, Gaze Mills area that we all know about. So we know that there are trees out there in the back 40s. And when you're driving around Mother's Day and you see that white spot on the landscape, that's an old apple tree, and who knows what it is. And that's one of the great fun parts of this project. It's like a big treasure hunt.
And they were all brought to this area? They're not native to North America at all?
So apples, the domestic apple, is not native to North America. They arrived from the east, the Atlantic coast, and they arrived from the southwest with the Spanish missions in Arizona, New Mexico, and California. A lot of missions had orchards. So those were the 2 kind of routes that led to apples being shared across North America. There is a native crab apple. In fact, there's several native crabs, which are genetically, they're apples. They can interbreed with domestic. In fact, that's how we get the modern apple you like to eat, is when apples from the center of origin in South Asia mixed with the apples of Europe and created the domestic apple we know. But I'm on the search for a prairie crab. There's a native shrub called a prairie crab. It is a native prairie shrub species. And I've never seen one in the field. I keep trying to find one. And I'd love to have one and put it right out here, right out here with the Farmers Memorial trees, because it's a native apple. So that's going to be another thing for another item for the future of this project is to find a native crab.
We have a question from Zoom.
Zoom. Hello, Zoom.
So the question is, did the farm families plant rootstock and graft to get their trees, or did they plant seeds or do something else?
Excellent question that I have no answer for.
Dan Besson said.
What did he say?
He said that back in the 1860s or 70s, there was a nursery in Baraboo.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, the Tuttles, among others, were key people in this part of Wisconsin in the apple business.
There was Tuttle's, then there was another one where the hospital was.
Oh, okay.
And then there was the one out there by the Glen.
By Durwood's Glen,
Glen
yeah,
Nursery.
right. Yep. So we know some of this history. I don't know, and it's kind of the process. This project helps us to learn more and more. But yeah, back 100, 120, 30 years ago, there were commercial orchards, commercial nurseries providing trees, and Dan has studied this. He knows, you can ask him. If you were a farmer in Iowa County in 1890 or 1920, where would you have bought your apples from? And he'll tell you, there were 6 within a 100-mile radius, or the popular one out of Chicago was this one. And here's their catalog. And so we have another project, another kind of spin-off from this project is our friends at Taliesin called us and said, hey, we want to reconstruct Frank Lloyd Wright's orchard from 1920, give or take. And we really don't know what to do with the trees. Some of them are getting old. So Dan has been working with them and I've helped out a little bit. They came to our grafting workshop. So Taliesin is doing the same project. They're reconstructing Frank Lloyd Wright's historic orchard, which you can see it's right behind the Taliesin house. And he can do that by going to Frank Lloyd Wright, kept very careful records of what kind of varieties he was planting. So again, you just kind of go down these fascinating trails and learn things all along the way about the history of all of this. So this guy's looming behind me, but okay, Mike,
You care about pears.
I love pears and I care about them. And we have not yet grafted. You can't graft pears onto apple rootstock. So I have to see if Dan can come up with some pear rootstock because there, as Mike knows, there are several. I'm thinking one in particular, it's out in Apple Alley. This pear tree is huge. It's huge and beautiful. It's one of the biggest trees in all of any in Badger, but it's a pear and it produces pears about this size. They're kind of late ripening. So I've never had a ripe one because I'm always too early. But that tree is just one example of a number of the pears. There are probably, I would guess, at least 8 or 10 pears that we've also identified in the field. Front.
Does the variety of the root matter when you graft it to a scion? Like, are you essentially always creating a hybrid because
Yeah,
you have one varietal maybe on a different root?
nope.
Okay.
When you're grafting onto a standard rootstock, it's going to grow what you graft, except it will put up suckers. And this is part of the maintenance of trees is sometimes you'll get branches growing up out of that rootstock, which are not the tree you want. So you have to go back and you have to prune those back. And that's how you maintain the tree.
But you do have to graft apple scion to apple root.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you ever use a standard rather than semi-dwarf just for the length of the tree to live longer?
We haven't yet. And mostly because we just let Dan tell us what to do.
Okay.
And he likes using the semi-dwarf. And for purposes of orchards, like the one we have now going at Dairy Forage, keeping them relatively compact is really helpful. It's a lot of work to take care of an orchard, even a small one. And so, having a semi-dwarf keeps the tree at a more manageable size, but maybe someday we'd want to do, especially for some of those top 10 Badger trees, we might want to try it a little different and grow them a little larger and longer lived.
Do you have any, run across any Harrison apples?
I know that
Carlson or Harrison?
Harrison.
Harrison,
Oh,
Are you familiar with Harrison?
We used
I
to
know
have
the name.
Carlson.
I know the name, and I think if Muffy were here, she might be able to share. And I know Dan knows that tree. Do you guys know it? No.
don't have bread and muffins, the portrait.
Okay.
It's, So it was like the #1 apple to make hard apple cider.
There you go. Okay, let's find some.
From out east. And during Prohibition, the feds came in and destroyed all of them.
Oh,
But they found one tree. Back in the 70s, they found one tree, and so they're trying to.
that's a new one for me. See what you're
In
learning.
Wisconsin's history, I thought there might be a here.
Yeah, I'll look into his manuscript to see if he describes it.
Part of the question, and maybe I'm not right on this, but when I planted, because you said about the suckers.
Yeah.
So, when you plant a graft tree, you gotta keep the graft above the ground.
Yep. Yep. And these are, I started, believe me, 10 years ago, I didn't know any of this. I'm learning every year we learn, I learn a little bit more about all this, and I didn't study it, but Dan is such a great mentor to all of us on this. And plus we have friends and neighbors in our community too, have been doing a lot more of this in a more systematic way, I'd say. So, yeah.
Besides white-tailed deer, are we aware of any native species that have adapted to start eating our apples?
Mike is thinking that one over.
I mean, I know hunters use them all the time, so I would think the whitetail would like them. But I just wonder if there's any other species that have started adapting if apples have been around.
Birds. I know that, more
Yeah.
nurture than, bulls and mice like.
Yeah, bark
And
and
the bark and
Yeah.
apples, we have.
Yeah.
On the grounds.
It is pretty amazing how deer,
Robins.
yeah, watching how deer target trees is pretty amazing. If you want to find an apple tree, follow the deer trail. You know, that's how we find some of the ones that are really hidden away. Last question. I'll hang around, but go ahead. Yeah.
Quick one, you built this mythical figure, I wanna know more. Has Dan retired from his family business and become a full-time Apple man? And can you point a little more towards this documentary where he's gonna be featured?
Yeah. So he is mythical. He's mystical. He's the Apple guru. He's a load of fun too. He's in the process of moving back to Wisconsin from Decorah. He has the farm he grew up on, and he also has an orchard started down in Silverwood Park in Dane County. Silverwood Park is way in the southeast part of Dane County, near Edgerton. And it's an unusual park. It was a farm that was deeded over to the county, and they've created sort of an agricultural park. And Dan is aiming to have 1,600 varieties of apples there.
Wow.
So he comes and helps us all the time. If you're interested in hanging out with Dan, I was hoping he'd be here tonight, actually. He might show up tomorrow for our work day. But this has been his life. And what's fascinating is he retired from the family business and he started just throwing himself into this. And all of a sudden the New York Times showed up, you know, and he got this high award from one of the horticultural societies internationally. But PBS somehow got word of him, Wisconsin Public TV, and said they wanted to do a feature on him and his work. He'd been on, you know, radio programs and such. So they came out and they're going to work to do this, I guess, next year in the fall, I suppose. And it sounds like it'll be a 15 or 20-minute feature on him and his work. But he's in touch with all the other people all around the country who are also doing this work of conserving threatened and lost agricultural biodiversity. And that's what makes it so fascinating and interesting. Now it intersects with the cultural history. I first met Dan when there was a workshop at the University Arboretum, 2008 or 9. And they gathered together all these mostly guys in their 70s and 80s who were the apple keepers from all over the country. And they'd never met each other. They brought them to Madison. And they had them all for 3 days in a workshop, and they all laid out priorities and shared stories with each other. That's how I got to know Dan. He did a little, I sat in on those sessions. So we're so lucky to have him here. He's just devoted to, and he loves Badger. He loves this project because it's all about what he's been so fascinated with apples, how the human history and the cultural history and the changing landscape all intersect, and apples are a fun way to tell that story. Bill, you had a hand up.
I did, I want to mention that right now the Sauk Prairie Conservation Land Company Badger Apple Corps is having their annual auction, and on that auction are some Badger apple trees.
There's one more left.
There's one left.
I can give you I was going to mention that. If you would like to support this project, you can go right online right now at the Sauk Prairie Conservation Alliance. 2 of the 3, we offered 3 trees to the auction. 2 of them have sold. Heather's probably checking right now. There's a 3rd one that you can still bid on and get your own Badger apple tree next spring. And I really encourage you to do that because the money goes straight to the Alliance and helps the work we do.
Just a postscript on Dan Bussey, if you want to see his multi-volume treatise on Wisconsin apples or North American apples, they do have a copy of the whole thing at the Sauk City Library. They're beautiful.
Well, shall we end it here? I'll stick around and answer more questions, but I know we started late, and all those Zoom people, we hope they stayed with us. Hi, Zoomers. Well, thank you all, and carry on, and we'll if you want to get involved in any of this, just chat with me and we'll sign you up.
Hey, Kurt. Well, can you see why I wanted him to give this talk to us? Yeah. But if you do go hear Dan Bussey talk, and he starts at 6 o'clock or something like that, don't make reservations at your favorite restaurant at 7. Just a warning there. So, yeah, it's such a great thing. When Heidi and I started my wife and I started coming in here in 2016, we would run all the roads out here. Back then, there wasn't signs, we could go wherever. And there were special apples. We really liked them, and they died. And I said to Kurt, geez, we really like that. And he's like, oh, that's number 122. We've got it grafted in the nursery. Yay, it's still there. So, all right. So, we have decided, we had some really hairy weather in December and January some years for our lecture series. So we decided to skip December and January now. And our next lecture will be February 11th. And Mike Mossman will be talking about kind of changes on the landscape out here at Badger, which ties in really well with some of the other things we've been talking about. So join us again. Put it on your calendar, February 11th. Mike Mossman. So thanks for showing up. Thanks for your support of the Badger history.